Hello, this is Pam Hemphill, down here at the Capitol in the Lincoln Room. Special guest today. There you go. Did the documentary, The Enemy Within.
All right, the committee will come back to order, and the next person on our agenda, a special presentation by Mr. Trevor Loudon, who came here to Idaho today to speak to us. He is a renowned specialist on this topic, living in Florida, and we're very fortunate to have you be here in Idaho today to speak with us and answer questions. And I would like to make a special recognition to our committee member, Laura Van Voorhees, for sponsoring Mr. Loudon to come to Idaho so that we could hear from him. So thank you so much for your dedication and your commitment to these issues. Thank you. So, Mr. Loudon, welcome to Idaho, and please feel free to introduce yourself and who you represent today.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the committee for being here, and to the audience for being here as well, and caring about education in this state. My name is Trevor Loudon. I'm originally from New Zealand. I hope you can understand my southern accent all right. And for 40 years, I've really studied and researched Marxism and Marxists. And it's in that capacity I want to speak to you today about critical race theory and similar doctrines, and why they should be very much opposed in your education system, why they are pernicious, and why they should be removed for the good of the children of this state, and the parents of this state too, by the way.
Well, thank you for being here today. Please proceed.
Okay, well, before I start, I'd like to establish two principles, because I think that will inform you where I come from and why I oppose CRT and its variants. Now, the first principle is this. I used to train people as apprentices. I used to run bakeries, and I trained many apprentices. And I remember one particular incident. I instructed one of my apprentices to mix a whole batch of Christmas cakes, big trays of cakes, and we put them all in the oven, and I went along to check them, and they were exploding all over the place, just exploding out of the trays, all over the oven. The place was full of smoke. And I said to them, what did you do? What did you do? And we pulled them out and we checked the recipe book. And the recipe book called for 0.7% baking soda. And I said, young man, what does 0.7% mean? He said, well, that's 7%, right? He didn't know the difference between 0.7 and 7%. Now that was a bit comical when it comes to Christmas cakes, because that could be disastrous when designing a bridge or an aircraft, or or designing a new drug. Objectivity and facts matter. And I believe that education, especially at the lower levels, should concentrate on facts and not ideology. Facts, H2O is not, water is not H3O, it's H2O. There's only one way to spell oxygen. There is only one capital of Idaho. The border between Idaho and Canada is very specific. You can see where it is. It's not a subject of opinion. We had Professor a while before talking about the diversity of opinion at college level. Well, that's fine at college level, but that is not the role of preschool or elementary school or anything like that. And the people who are now coming into colleges are being indoctrinated at preschool level, so they come into college with a very limited range of opinion, basically different strands of Marxism. That's really their range of opinion. So my view is this, that education should be teaching objective fact. And where there is some moral or religious dimension, that should reflect the local community. That's what it should be. The people who are paying the taxes to support this system, their values should be the values taught, not the values of somebody from somewhere else who may be infected with Marxism or some other doctrine. Now, the second principle I want to establish is that this country was founded different from any other country in the world. It was founded on the principle that your rights come from God, not the government. Now, that doesn't mean it's protecting Christian rights or Muslim rights or Jewish rights. It means that your rights do not come from the government, they come from a higher power. And therefore, the government has no right to infringe on those rights because they do not grant them. Now, that is the foundation of the American Republic. For thousands of years, we had a different system. The idea was divine right of kings. The king would speak to God, and then the king would tell the people what God wanted them to do. Give every fifth child to his army, every third daughter to his court, 20% of your grain harvest every year. And if you disobeyed the king, you were disobeying God. Because it always happened to be that God agreed with the king. It was very, very handy. So the American Republic was founded on the direct opposite principle. Your rights do not come from the king. Your rights do not come from Caesar or the Commissar or the Politburo or anyone else. They are divinely inspired. They are intrinsic. They are part of you. And the role of government is only to protect those rights. That is the foundation of the American Republic. That is why kids go to school every day and swear to protect the Constitution of the United States of America. That's the foundation. That is the objective foundation of this republic. So any doctrine that opposes that foundation should not be taught in public schools, certainly not to 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 8-year-old kids. They are there to learn the history of their country, the foundations of their country, and objective geography, objective science, objective mathematics. That is the role of education. And when education gets away from that role, it's getting in very, very dangerous ground. Because somebody with an ideology is going to come there and use that captive audience to transform those kids into something else. So that's my foundational principles. Now, critical race theory, it should really be called Marxist critical race theory, because that's what it is. Now, the old Marxist paradigm, that Karl Marx brought forward and Lenin refined and Stalin and Mao contributed to and Trotsky had a hand in developing, that had the basic concept that society, that the capitalist society was intrinsically tending to inequality. That the rich would always get richer and the poor would eventually get poorer. And to address this horrible balance, the proletariat, the poor, the 99%, as Occupy Wall Street would have it, must rise up and confiscate the wealth of the bourgeois, the 1%, the rich. And then you would have an equal society and general prosperity. That is the goal of communism. That is the stated goal of communism. But that does not work well in a Western country, particularly America. Now, this is a country with very limited class structure and very high social mobility. You can start out dirt poor in this country and end up filthy rich. You can start out filthy rich and end up dirt poor too, as it should be. That's the beauty of the system. You only rise according to your merit, and you fall according to the lack of your merit. And you always have a choice about that. So Marxism wasn't making a lot of progress in America because there was no real class tension here. People from any background could make money and do well and look after their kids and give their children a better future. The great American dream, the antithesis of the Marxist argument. Well, the revolutionaries wanted to take down this country. They wanted to weaken this country. And they knew they could, because America is the greatest impediment to the world socialist state. It's always been the #1 enemy of world socialism. A free, independent, constitutional America has always been the problem. So what do? You must get inside the system. You must weaken America. You must bring America down. Because then, when America is brought to its knees, then there is no more impediment to the world socialist state. And education was always on top of the list. It started with Dewey in the 1920s, the father of modern American education, who admired the Soviet system tremendously, regularly visited the Soviet Union, and imposed his theories on millions of young American school children. And we're still feeling the impact of that. But critical race theory, this is what we're looking at now. It's called in this day, what is it? Diversity, equity and inclusion. Okay, they change the names. When one name becomes toxic, they change it to another. But what is critical race theory? Critical race theory is Marxism applied to race. You can't do it with class here. You have to use race, because you can change your class in America, but you can never change your race. So therefore, a much more effective way of creating social division and revolutionary ferments was to use race. And the communists have been doing that since the 1920s. But critical race theory really started in the 1980s with a guy called Derek Bell, a Harvard law professor. And Bell formulated the theory of critical race theory. It was basically you criticize everything about American race relations, everything to do with race in American culture, and the logic was that America is an intrinsically racist country, it's intrinsically corrupt, it was built on slavery, and therefore the white Christian capitalist patriarchy must be overthrown by the oppressed peoples of colour. So instead of the proletariat overthrowing the bourgeoisie, it is the oppressed peoples of colour overthrowing the white Christian capitalist patriarchy. It's exactly the same thing, but it's using race instead of class. Now, Derek Bell was a contributor. He really is the father of this. He's acknowledged as the father of it. He was a member, he used to write for a publication called Freedom Ways, and I've included some exhibits to members of the panel, 10 pages of pictures of what I'm saying. And one of the first pictures is a picture of the magazine Freedom Ways, and here's Derek Bell contributing to it at the bottom. Now, Freedom Ways was set up by the Communist Party USA to basically foment revolution amongst this country's black intellectual community. It was funded by both the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and the Communist Party of China. Derek Bell was also involved in the foundation of the National Association of Black Lawyers. And as you'll see from their own website, that was an organization set up to aid the black revolution, to work in support of Palestine and Cuba, and aid and provide legal support for gun-toting black revolutionaries. Their words. It was also an affiliate of the International Association of Democratic Lawyers, which is named by the CIA as the Soviet Union's international legal front group. It still exists today, mainly now run by Greek and Cuban communists. And it is still affiliated today to this organization. So Derek Bell was 100% Marxist, tied to the revolutionary movements of China, of the Soviet Union, etc. The modern guru of critical race theory, Ibram X. Kendi, whose books are now recommended reading in the US Navy, the real guru of critical race theory today, you'll look at the exhibit there. Kendi is a long-time associate of Kiana Yamata Taylor, a well-known Marxist academic and until its recent dissolution, a leading member of the International Socialist Organization, a Trotskyist communist group. You will see that Kendi attended Socialism 2018. He attended a panel with Kianga Yamata Taylor, and you'll see they were talking about critical race theory and Marxism right there in front of your eyes. Kendi is a Marxist revolutionary. He wants to set up a government department that can police issues of racism in this country and penalise people they deem to be racist, organisations they think might be racist, institutions that may not conform to their anti-racist ideology. The man is a totalitarian Marxist, folks. Simple. In his own words, you can see that. Now, the complementary principle, white privilege. See, white privilege basically means that you can be white and on food stamps and you're oppressing a black football player earning $40 million a year. Because racism is not a personal failing. If you're looking at critical race theory, the Marxist theory of racism, racism is not a personal failing. When we talk about racism, we mean you don't like people of another colour. You have an irrational prejudice against people of another colour or another ethnicity because you have personal failings. You're not objective, you're biased, you're not a very nice person. We can understand that. Racism does not mean that to Marxists. Racism is the prevailing power structure using racial divisions to control a nation. So therefore, if you are black, you cannot be racist because you're not part of the prevailing power structure. If you are Asian, you cannot be racist. If you're Native American, you cannot be racist. You can only be racist if you're part of the prevailing white power structure. This is their terminology. This is not my terminology. Please understand that. I believe everybody is an individual and should be judged as such. Marxists believe we belong to collectives and should be judged by collective standards. And I oppose that vehemently, but I'm explaining their philosophy. They believe that if you're white, even if you are married to a person of colour, even if you've adopted children or people of colour, you are automatically racist because that's the culture you were born into. Just like in the old days of the Bolshevik Revolution, if your father was a capitalist, they would put you in jail. If your grandfather was a capitalist, you couldn't go to college or travel overseas. You were guilty of the sins of your father. Well, critical race theory makes anybody who wasn't born a person of colour guilty of the sins of their birth. It's intrinsically evil. It's intrinsically divisive. It's intrinsically corrupt. Now, the fathers of white privilege, this concept that we've all heard about recently and goes hand in hand with critical race theory, were two men, Ted Allen, both white by the way, Ted Allen and Noel Ignatieff. Both of them were members in the 1960s of the Provisional Organizing Committee for the foundation of the Marxist-Leninist Communist Party. They were both members of the Communist Party USA, but split off because that was too moderate. They split off into a pro-Chinese communist split with this long-winded name, which I'll just call POC right now. So they invented the concept of white privilege, and they wrote books. They wrote several books on this. You'll see some of the books listed in the things I've given you there. And Noel Ignatieff was responsible for a book, a long-running magazine called Race Traitor, and the tagline was, "Loyalty to the white race is treason to humanity." Meaning that if you know, and this is what they say. So if you believed in white privilege, if you were part of the white power structure, you were guilty of treason to humanity. You were lower than dirt. You were scum. Unless you were an active anti-racist following the whole Marxist agenda, prepared to flagellate yourself endlessly for your birth, you were an evil, evil person. And you could only expiate that guilt by being an anti-racist, by marching with Black Lives Matter, with donating to radical causes, by flagellating yourself in school and saying how you were so guilty for having white privilege. This is Marxist conditioning, people. What did they do in the culture? See, this comes out of Maoism, because these guys were Maoists. And by the way, the last issue of Race Traitor had a contributing article by Derek Bell, the inventor of critical race theory. So this was Maoism. So what did they do in the Maoist Cultural Revolution? They had people on the streets, and if they were a capitalist or an intellectual, they put a dunce cap on them and run them through the streets. People throwing rocks at them and tomatoes well, they probably couldn't afford tomatoes then, but whatever they could throw at them. They ripped down the statues of the old ways. They burned all the books. They overturned the old society because they were building a new society. Critical race theory is here to destroy everything about the culture of this country, the tradition of this country, the history of this country, good or bad. No country's perfect, but it's to totally destroy the history of this country so they can build a new society on the ashes of the old. Critical race theory is pure Marxism. It comes from pro-Soviet and pro-Chinese communists. It is now pushed by pro-Chinese communist groups like Liberation Road, which is the father of Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is a front for a pro-Chinese communist group called Liberation Road. They are intimately linked with the Chinese consulate in San Francisco. They take instructions from the Chinese consulate in San Francisco. The leaders of this group run their messaging past the Chinese consulate in San Francisco. So what I'm saying here is this. Critical race theory is not about attempting to address past grievances. It's not about racial reconciliation. It's not about any of the things its proponents tell you it's about. It is rubbing raw the past wounds of America. It is exaggerating everything that's bad about America to make it the only thing that is really characteristic of America. So you have thousands of millions of young kids in America today. They believe that America got rich by ripping off the third world, that America was built on slavery, that America has oppressed people endlessly, that America is the most evil nation on the planet. This is the doctrine being taught to millions of young Americans and thousands of young Idahoans right now. They might call it IEC, but it is Marxism. That's all it is, folks. Marxism using race rather than Marxism using class. And if you allow this further into your schools, you're going to lose the next generation of your kids. How many people do you know, good Christian families, good conservative families, good patriotic families who slave away and they finally get to send junior to college? The first kid in the family's going to go to college and they're so proud. And the first Thanksgiving, that kid comes home and tells his parents how stupid and how racist they are. Am I exaggerating here, folks?
No.
We hear this all of the time. And if we allow this to be taught in our schools, we have nobody to blame but ourselves for losing our children and losing our country. Because we will lose the country, folks.
Yeah.
We're already seeing the massive division in this country. We're already seeing the mass brainwashing of our youth, who are turning against their history, they're turning against their culture, they're turning against the values of this amazing country. People, I come from a country that was saved during World War II from invasion by the Imperial Japanese Army by the sacrifice of hard-working, young American boys who put on uniforms, picked up rifles, and marched down into the Pacific or stormed the beaches at Normandy to save us from slavery. Because they understood that liberty was important. They understood their rights come from God, and that we are all God's children, and they had an obligation to everybody to try and protect those rights and extend freedom across the world. America has done more good on this planet than any other nation by a country mile. It has saved more people from tyranny. It has brought more people out of poverty. It has saved more people from slavery than any other nation. It is the nation that everybody wishes they were like. No matter what the left tells you, everybody wants to be like America. And here we have Americans wanting to throw all of that away by indoctrinating their own children in Marxism, dividing their own country along racial lines. Is that a recipe for anything but disaster? For not just us, not just you here, but every other country in the world. Because if America goes down, folks, guess who's going to run the world from that point? You're talking China, you're talking Iran, you're talking the enemies of liberty. America's hanging on by a thread, folks, and the hope is in the young people. And the young people are being taken away because you're allowing them to be indoctrinated by alien philosophies. And there's two constituencies for this. The left loves it because the left hates America, and the left believes its own propaganda, and they want everybody to think like they do. And you have some elements on the right who just want to make money no matter what. You know, you have some of the elements who might say, well, we've got to have critical race theory because we want to attract big businesses to this state. And they have government contracts, and the government contracts demand diversity mandates. So if you don't have them in this state, we can't come and set up in Idaho. Sorry. Well, I'll tell you this straight, folks. That's a bluff. Because you have a good workforce here, you have a great climate, you have a great place to bring up children. You can get any business you want here if you have good education and you keep your state like it is. You turn your state to San Francisco, they won't want to come here, people. But the big thing is this. Think about this. If you believe in business, which I do, and you think making a bit more money from these big anti-American corporations is more important than your kids' future, you do not deserve to be in any leadership position in this state or any other. If you cannot put your own kids first, your own country first, beyond your immediate short-term economic benefit, you are not morally fit to lead anybody at all. So this is my view, folks. You have a great opportunity in this state to get back to a sound education system. You want to attract people here, you want to attract business, you have a classic education system in your state. Teach real math, teach real penmanship, teach real geography, teach real science. Get rid of all of the indoctrination, and you will have people flocking to your state to send their kids to your schools. You know, even a lot of liberals, they want their kids educated right. They will, look, you have this great opportunity because you have a very patriotic base here, a very well educated base, and one of the states that understands the Constitution and what makes this country different, more so than virtually any other state, with the possible exception of my state, Florida. Okay? But this is a chance. So, look, critical race theory is Marxism. It is indoctrination, it is evil, it's corrupt, and it is not anything to do what its proponents say it is. It is not teaching history. It is teaching a very select, ideological driven version of history, just like Adolf Hitler used to do. They used to teach history in German schools. What kind of history do you think they taught about the Jewish people, folks? They taught history, and critical race theory teaches history, but a very doctored, biased, Marxist version of history. If you think that is suitable for Idaho children, what are you doing on this panel, folks? And I'm sure you don't. I'm sure you want your kids taught the truth. I'm sure you want your kids accepting others on a rational basis, being tolerant and kind towards others. You know, you want to end racism. There's a very simple thing in the Bible that tells you how to do it. Do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. That completely supersedes any critical race theory you could possibly think of. So I'll wind it up. I just want to say, thanks for the opportunity. Critical race theory is Marxism. It comes from China. It comes from the old Soviet Union. It comes from Cuba. It's a foreign ideology being pushed by Marxists in this country as part of their revolutionary plan to take down the world's greatest nation so they can impose their vision, their corrupt, evil vision on society. That's all it is, very simple, and please get it out of your state, root it out of your state, and set a shining example for all other states to do the same. Not just change the name, not just pretend it's something else, get it out of your state and proudly say so that others may follow. You'll be doing your children a favour, you'll be doing yourselves a favour, and you'll be doing this country a favour. Thank you so much.
Mr. Loudon, do you want to move to Idaho?
I'm very tempted, Madam Chair. I love this state. I really do love this state.
We can appoint you to the State Board of Education. Thank you so much for your powerful words. I want to just ask you, Mr. Loudon, if you could talk a little bit about, you mentioned it with the diversity, you mentioned the word diversity, but since we're talking about specifically in one of our upcoming presentations, and I mentioned it in the Board of Education minutes, the terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Could you help us understand a little bit more how you see that as being the same and equal to the critical race theory?
Yeah, well, look, America was founded on the principle of equality. Equality, that's equality before the law, meaning no matter what your background or your race, theoretically you are equal to anyone else. We know that hasn't always worked out, but that is the ideal. Equity means equality of outcome. It means no matter where you start from, you have to be either dumbed down or pulled up so everybody's equal. So rather than starting on a level playing field, those who are strong must be weakened, those who are weakened must be strengthened, so everybody's the same. Theoretically, if you're born and you grow to 6 feet tall and your next door neighbour's 5 foot tall, you should have 6 inches chopped off your legs and given to the other guy. That's what equity means. That resources should be taken from groups that have more and given to groups that have less. Power should be taken from groups that have more and given to groups that have less. Equity is another name for Marxism. It is radical redistribution of wealth and power. Inclusion means that everybody, even the outliers of society, must be included in the consensus. It means that there is no, but it doesn't, like, if you're a conservative, if you believe in borders, or the Constitution, you're not part of that inclusion. Inclusion just means that anybody who has some grievance, anybody who has some handicap, anybody that has some, even aberrant views should be included. The purpose is to dilute the traditional view with much more radical views. Pedophilia right now is now being pushed as almost acceptable in the name of inclusion and diversity. That's not something that most people here, I believe, would think should be included in any mix. But there are people on the left right now pushing the acceptance of pedophilia as a natural outcome of inclusion. You've got to include all of the different viewpoints, except if they're conservative, or if they're Christian, or if they're traditionalist, or they're constitutionalist. They are fascist, and they should not be included in any form of civil dialogue. So inclusion is a scam. It's just including all voices on the left and none on any other side of the spectrum. So, the whole message of this idea is, when the left has an idea that gets too hot, they change the name. When Common Core was getting hot a few years ago, they changed it to say, like, Idaho standards or, Nebraska standards or something like that. When the word liberal was getting a dirty name, they went to progressive. So this is just what they do. So these concepts, the inclusion, diversity, equity, they're just, what do you call it? They're just words for Marxism. They're just, the communists, the left have different terminology than us. Like we talk about democracy. Most people understand democracy meaning rule of law, rights under the law, representative government. The left and democracy under communism used to mean this. Democracy is the will of the people. Who is the representative of the people? The communists are the representatives of the people. So democracy means the rule of the communists. That's why you have the German Democratic Republic, East Germany. Why you have North Korea today, the Korean Democratic Republic. You got to understand, when they're talking about equity, you think equality. When they're talking about inclusion, you think everybody having a fair go and having a contribution. It doesn't mean that. It means some form of redistribution of wealth or power. It's a scam. They're coming into a state that's conservative. They're coming into a state that's patriotic. They're not going to come and say, we're going to teach your kids Marxism. They're going to say, we're going to teach your kids about the racial history of this country. We're going to teach your kids about inclusion. We're going to teach your kids about equity. And who could argue with any of that if you don't understand what they actually mean by what they say?
Thank you, Mr. Loudon. Are you willing to take questions from the
Sure.
All right. Are there any questions from Mr. Loudon from the committee? Mr. Hand?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sir, thanks a lot. You've mentioned a few times that the base here in Idaho is very patriotic. You talked about being proactive. I would suggest, and I'm just looking for a comment on this, that we're in a position now where we need to be reactive. We have a board of education that doesn't respond. They don't seem to care. I don't know if they're missing the email or what. I've personally communicated to numerous superintendents in where I live in District 6. They haven't responded. And it seems like we have a system that is more concerned maybe about their jobs than what's right and wrong. So I actually think we need to be in the reactive mode.
Yeah.
Can you comment on that, please?
Well, that's exact. Yes, Madam Chairman, may I respond to that question? Yes. Look. Exactly. We are not going to recover this by just not doing much. See, the bureaucracy is a bureaucracy. Elected officials come and go. The bureaucracy is always there. So they're just going to think, well, they don't want critical race theory. Our bosses don't want critical race theory. The people don't want it, but we do. So we're just going to make a few noises, pretend to do something, stonewall, it'll all die away, people will forget about it, and then we'll just go on what we're doing. No, heads have to roll. You know, no, I'm not going to be partisan here, but I guarantee a lot of people here would think that President Trump's biggest mistake in his term of office was not firing a whole bunch of people. You know, because the bureaucracy had a life of its own. You know, most presidents come in and they fire the existing leaders because they want to make a new stamp. President Trump didn't do that, and he got in trouble for it. Reagan did do that. Most Democrats will do that. They will fire any appointment that was there from another party. Now, this is what has to happen here. You know, who is really running education in the state, people? Is it the people and the elected officials, or is it the bureaucrats? That's the question, because the bureaucrats are largely ideological. They are ideological because that's what bureaucrats are. People who aren't ideological, they get out and create businesses. They build churches. They do a lot of things in their lives. Bureaucrats want to control people. Now, this is a generality, but people, when you've got a powerful bureaucracy that has total power over the education of your children's future, don't you think that somebody wants to get in there and take advantage of that? That's human nature, folks. They have a vision for a better world. You've got this big bureaucracy that has control over hundreds of thousands of Idaho kids. You've got a legislature that isn't paying a lot of attention. Wouldn't you get in there and start putting your stamp on things? And when you get a little bit of pressure, wouldn't you sort of stonewall and fob your bosses off until they got de-elected, and then somebody more favourable come along? This is how it is. And I think, you know, really, if you want to save your state and you want to save your children's future, I think you should be looking at replacing anybody who's going along with this Marxism and actually reducing the power of the bureaucracy. See, I believe in the state, correct me if I'm wrong, the school boards actually have the power to set curriculums. I know that's the case in Indiana, but most school boards don't. I would love to see a school board taken over by patriots and just most of the curriculum dumped and a classic curriculum reinstated, like we used to have in this country for about 200 years. Yes. You do that, other states would soon follow. I would guarantee you this. The poorest little black kid in Alabama, in the poorest school district of that state in 1952, would have got a better education in the basics than the richest white kid in the best school district in Idaho today. Anybody care to argue with that proposition? That's the reality. So do we not owe it to our kids to get the bureaucrats out of the way so that the parents and the elected officials actually run the education system as it was designed to be?
Any follow-up, any further questions? Pete?
Madam Chair. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
You helped me understand what my parents did for me. They took me out of a country that hated mixed race kids. They picked me and my twin brother up from the hospital and said, we're gonna love these kids, when nobody else will love them. They took 9 kids from Austria and brought us to North Idaho so we could have an opportunity to learn. Not by what people dictated, but what we experienced through those life lessons that make us better people. God bless you, sir, and continue your message. Thank you very much.
Madam Chairman, may I add something to those comments, because I agree with them. May I add something to those comments? Yeah. Well, look, see, this is the thing. You came from Austria, right?
Yes.
And as a young man, and most nations of Europe are countries that were the borders were decided really by either religious or cultural or language differences. You know, so each nation was really a language group or a cultural group or a religious group. America was the first country in the world decided not by a religious or cultural group so much as by an idea that your rights come from God and nothing can stand in the way of that. And it doesn't matter what background you come from or what your cultural history was or what your racial background was. If you come to this country and accept those ideals, that you want to live free and better yourself, you are welcome. That is what makes America different. And now the critical race theory people are trying to destroy all of that and drive it back into what race you are or what culture you came from. This is a massively retrograde step. It is only going to balkanize this country and create what you've seen in Europe. America had peace, America had prosperity, because this is not about what race you are, it is about whether you believe in the American ideal or not. And now they want to destroy that American ideal, and everything you value will go with it if you allow them to do that.
Any further questions from the committee? Reverend Wilson.
Madam Chair, Mr. Loudon, thank you so very, very much for what you're doing and just for being here and sharing with us. I have a question, but I need to lay a foundation for it. We've been given an awful lot of material to read, awful lot of material to research, and we've been researching it. And every item that I've read and digested has come back to a common point, and that is that whether it's critical race theory or critical theory or social smarts and whatever, there's always this sense that while there may be such a thing as objective knowledge out there, there's no way for human beings to access it.
Yes.
And what it reminds me of every time I hit a new topic or a new page or a new chapter is the oldest trick in the book, all the way back to the Garden of Eden, when the snake said to Eve, did God really ever say anything? Is there anything that's really real? So with that in mind, that's where I'm coming from when I ask you the question I want to ask you. I'd like to ask you to say, first of all, something about Herbert Marcuse and Angela Davis, who are Derek Bell's forerunners. But also, you mentioned Nazism just in passing as you were talking about Marxism. The more I read, the more I see Nazism, which is just the other side of the coin, obviously.
Yeah.
But I'd like to ask you to say some more about Nazism and Marcuse and Angela Davis, and I believe they're two sides of the same coin. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, that's exactly right. See, Madam Chair, may I address that? Thank you. Sorry. Yeah, look, the Western tradition, right back to Aristotle, is been based on science and objective knowledge that there is objective truth. Our whole justice system is based on objective truth. Is there evidence to prove that you did that thing or not? And if you did, you can be punished, and if we can't prove it, you're free. The justice system is based on objectivity. Our education system used to be based on objectivity. Our culture was based on objectivity. All of these isms, postmodernism, etc., there is no objective reality, they will say. Your opinion is worth just as much as the other guys. There is no two genders. There are 60 genders. It's a fluid thing. But if you don't even know what gender you are you going to be able to storm the beaches at Normandy and save the world, folks? If you cannot objectively look at your situation and know what you stand for and know what is real and know what is true, if you cannot make those comparisons, you're a sucker for anything. You'll fall for anything they throw at you. So the whole purpose of leftist education in this country is to destroy objectivity, to go totally on emotion. So, you know, so if you stand up for certain beliefs, you'll be demonized. If you don't agree with the prevailing view, you'll be demonized. And the idea is to make you a compliant human being who has no principle, has no standard of objectivity or truth outside the state. And that is the basis of Nazism. That's the basis of communism. That is the basis of critical race theory, IEL, all of these things that you're seeing in your school system. Not just in the soft sciences, they have critical accounting now, folks. They have critical geography. You know, they talk about, you know, in accounting, it's the white capitalists use their money to oppress the third world nations. It's all designed to weaken the individual. Because if you want to be a strong individual, you have to understand objective truth. You've got to understand right and wrong. You have to be able to identify principles and stand up for principles. If they can destroy principles and objective truth, you're just a leaf blowing in the wind. And you can be used for anything. And this is what they did in Nazism, you know. This is a criticism here. You know, there was one force that could have stopped the Nazis before World War II, and that was the German churches. They had the numbers and the moral authority to say, this is wrong. People do not fall for this stuff. And most of the churches basically became good Nazi Christians. They put swastikas in their churches, and they said to Hitler, you do your stuff, we'll do our stuff. They totally bowed out. There's a famous story, and it may be apocryphal, it may not have happened, but it's an illustration of the little German church by a railway track. And one day a boxcar pulls up outside, and they're singing, the church people are singing away, and they're hearing bang, 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 bang from the boxcar. This is Jews going to Auschwitz, people desperate to get out. And what was their response? Sang louder. They had been indoctrinated by the state to not disobey the state. Under Nazism, the state was God. Hitler was the Führer. You do not disobey the Führer. You're a traitor if you disobey the Führer. If you really understand your religion, if you really understand your place in life, if you understand the principles of liberty and objective truth, you do not get sucked in by tyrants and dictators. You'll stand up for liberty, you'll stand up for your brothers, you'll stand up for other people, regardless of the personal cost to yourself. But when they destroy that objectivity, when they destroy the principles that you are given by your parents or your church, you are just, as I said, a leaf in the wind. You can be used for any form of manipulation they want. And that is what we're seeing with many of the young generation today. They know nothing about their history. They know nothing about the principles that made this country great. They think if they do know anything, it's about the horrible history of America. And so, what are they doing? They're marching to destroy this country. They're not marching to save it. And we cannot allow this situation to continue, because if this country goes down, so does mine. And I care about this country, and I care about my country. I'm sure all of you do too.
God bless every God bless America.